could have put the Alps up because everyone seemed to be at UTMB, so you could just like.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. What is going on with my hair though? I mean, it just looks like there are ends to it. It looks like it's a bowl.
It's the background. The background's not helping that. it's giving it a real ambiguous edge. Where does your hair end and the background start, or vice versa?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna give it a minute or so for everybody to log on. I can see participants going up and up. Welcome. This evening, I'm Mary. I'm the brand development manager for Harrier. We've got Kate here, as well as our guest speaker, Ronnie, who I'll introduce properly in a bit. And I just want to say thanks very much for tuning in. We've got a great evening planned, and I'm sure you guys are going to find this session really, really useful. Just before we get going, though, I've got a couple of housekeeping things. So on the bottom menu of your screen, you've got a chat section. If you guys can all hear me okay and see everybody okay, can you just drop a little thumbs up or a yes in the chat section, just so I know that everybody's getting on all right. So obviously I wasn't expecting any technical hitches, but we'll work and try to sort the chat out. Chat is just for talk amongst other guests. And if you guys have a question throughout the evening, if you could pop it in the Q&A, which is a separate section. I'm gonna, as Ronnie's talking, I'm gonna interject if we've got relevant questions. So please drop it in the Q&A and not in the chat. So I have a little poll to kick things off, which I'm just going to launch now. You can only keep one. So you can either keep Facebook or Strava. Which one's it going to be? Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Strava took off like a rocket, but now Facebook is catching up. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Oh, it's getting a bit even. I'm not sure which one I would pick. Probably Strava, just because I really like all the stats. And I think that's what all of you have said as well. 58% Strava. Excellent. So I've got another one, which is more appropriate for what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is race reflection. So I'm going to launch this. Have you ever done a race reflection before? And what I mean by that is like actually writing things down. So after you finished your race, you've thought about it and you've written things down. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer that, and then I'll end it, and I'll share the results. Right, so I'm going to end that now and share the results. So a lot of people, Ronnie, haven't done a race reflection before. Only about 29% have done it. So that's interesting. Right, I'm going to stop sharing that. I have to do a couple of bits to enable the chat, so I'll do that once Ronnie starts talking. But just to give you a little bit, if you're new to us, if you're new to our trail sessions, our webinars, if you've never joined us before, this particular session that we're doing is part of Harrier's How to Run 100 Miles resource, which, with the help of our experts, Ronnie, who you'll hear from in a bit, and Dan Summers, it's a really valuable tool for ultra runners. If you've not had a chance to check it out yet, we're going to be launching the last module, which is module 3, very, very soon. That's going to include a section on race reflection. It's also going to have how to write your race plan, drop bag tips, recovery tips, and a lot more. So whether you're running 100 miles or whether you're doing like your first 50K, we're sure that you're going to find lots of helpful tips in there. So after the webinar, have a look. It's on our website under help and then how to run 100 miles. So I'm going to stop talking in a second, but before I do, I just want to introduce our guest speaker tonight. It's Ronnie Staton. He's an ultra running coach. He's race director for Hobo Pace events, and some of you might be registered for the Robin Hood 100 in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm sure Ronnie and his crew are going to look after you very well for that. Ronnie's got a degree in coaching, sport, and exercise science, but he's also qualified in cognitive behavioral therapy, and he regularly hosts a webinar called The Positive Runner, and it really helps runners think about their training from a mental perspective as well as a physical perspective. He's helped hundreds of ultra runners tackle distances from 30 miles to 300 miles. And he's actually just completed Offa's Dyke, which is 185-mile race in Wales. So this is like perfect timing, Ronnie, because you're doing your race reflection at the moment. How did it go? How did you find it?
Yeah, no, it has been perfect timing because I have just finished my race reflections for that race. And I should come with a disclaimer as well, because actually this time last week, I was pushing into the 4th night on King Offa's Dyke. So I was still going this time last week. And I think I finished about 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning. So if I start making words up and talking absolute rubbish, I'm putting it down to tiredness from King Offa's Dyke. I think everyone who did it and has been there have said they've had quite a tough week last week, but obviously it's bled into this week as well. So no, it was absolute ideal timing, because as I went through my race reflections, obviously being a bigger race, that 185 miles, I think that's when it's more worthwhile to do it. It brought out lots of things that I wanted to talk about and made sure I covered it. I think that's the first thing to mention, actually, is that in tonight's talk and the blog that we'll put out after, I have actually edited the blog after speaking with you to make it almost like notes to this talk. So the participants will get a shorthand of what I'm saying right now, because I thought that'd be very useful. I'm talking about here reflecting on the bigger goals. So the bigger ambitions, the things that you really had to work for over many, many months, potentially years, not just breakthrough sessions or in your training. Reflecting and keeping notes in your training is obviously very valuable for progression and keeping a hand on things. But I'm talking about when you've done that 100-miler or that 50K, that first breakthrough ultra that you might have been doing, or the bigger distance going to a multi-day or a 200 or 300-miler. And there's so many variables, there's so many things that feed into such an event that it can be well worthwhile doing a race reflection. It's also worth saying that I actually don't give this kind of process to the runners I coach. And the reason for that is it would be too big. To give somebody a whole kind of parquet of a reflective process of the template that I'm about to give now, I want to highlight areas that an individual might want to reflect upon, but to see it as a parquet or a questionnaire almost that you went through post-event would be not overwhelming, but it'd feel quite perfunctory and laborious, and it would sap all the fun out of your ultra running. And the last thing I want to do is do that to people with admin. So all I simply ask is, how did it go? And those runners then have done their own reflection to give me in a soundbite or in a nutshell how their event went. Now, if I feel they've not reflected well enough and their overview is lacking in certain areas, especially if the challenge they did was a lot bigger, then I will probe from this reflective process personally that I've got now to find out a little bit more about other areas. But what tends to happen is it's quite intuitive, it's fast, it's fun, and really creative, and it's basically it unfurls from spontaneity, really. And if you break it down too much with going through a whole laborious form, I think you'd kill a lot of that. But obviously, for me to offer value this evening, I have to cover it as a wholesome topic and highlight all the different areas that there may be. I wanted to just reiterate, I'm not really suggesting that you sit down and go through every point, but it's certainly certain individuals would want to do that. More introverted type people who like to think, I think would find it quite interesting and gain a lot from it. And I'm certainly that type of individual, and I did it for King Offa's Dyke. But a more extroverted, fast talking, social person out there all the time would really see it hard going to do something like this. And that's why for me as a coach, to issue it as a template would be wrong, because everybody reflects differently. So this is, for me as a coach, I'm thinking of these areas, and has this person reflected on these areas, and what are they telling me? By doing it fast and intuitively, what you tend to do is you tend to go straight to the areas that really need the work. And it's almost like we're looking for the major dysfunction of what happened at your event. And that's great, because if we deal with the big stuff, often the little stuff might not be so important. We're certainly not going to work on the little things before the big things. So when somebody tells me just from that simple question, how did it go? I normally get what I need, and we'll probe further from that. But why reflect? You know, why would we do that? I think first and foremost, after a big challenge, to take the time to reflect on what we've just done is a great way to acknowledge our achievement. If we just rush into the next event or into training for something else, and obviously with busy lives, with children and work and whatever, it's very easy to miss what we've just achieved. And that's important, because it's not only important for fulfillment, for motivation, and to be re-inspired on what we've just done. It's also important for the future, because the more arduous ultras get, the more important it is to build up your self-confidence and your self-efficacy. So how well you rate yourself to be able to complete or execute another ultra. And if you don't give yourself the time to acknowledge your achievements, then you're not going to build that self-confidence up. But you also need to reflect, to highlight what went right and what wasn't so ideal, so then you can start to improve to go forward. Myself included, within this, we've all made the same mistake twice. And in ultra running, you can multiply that by 4 or 5. You'll talk to guys and girls that have done the same thing repeatedly on ultras, and you might be running alongside them and they'll say, this did this last time. And because of the gap between your events, you can sometimes quite easily forget that you've worn a pair of shorts that chafe after 50 miles and now they're doing it again, or that head torch didn't work too well last time you used it, you've not used it since and it's playing up again. All these little features on your bag that might have been irritating you, or a bladder that slightly leaked. If you don't reflect on the practical things as well, you'll tend to keep repeating the same mistakes. And I remember talking to people trying to glean information and insight off ultra runners, you know, a decade ago. And there was very friendly, very nice people, but most unhelpful, because all they could kind of tell me is like wives' tales and things like, yeah, once I started drinking Coke, I really got going. And none of it made any stackable sense to me. And like you said in that poll, a lot of people perhaps haven't done a race reflection before. I think it's very valuable. The way you'll do it will be individual to do, and it can be very fast. I think it's a fun thing to do, but it should really help you going forward. So first thing I would start with, and I'm going to go through these areas now, is result. You got to look the result square on. You know, Are you happy with the result? Did you get the result you felt that was fair? I love to ask that question. Was it fair? Not so much was it good, was it fair? And only you can sense that from a feeling, really, that if you've trained hard and then you've gone and done well, you'll probably say, I got a fair result. Runners always want to do that little bit better. So I'm not talking about that feeling. I'm talking about, was it fair? What happened at that event? It might not have been, did you even finish? Did you get a DNF? So I'm talking about, you've gone through this event and you've come out the other side, and now you're looking at the result. The result is what's happened. You've got to accept it, but you've got to pick it apart a little bit. The result will become to be more understood as you've gone through the reflective process. So I don't dwell on the result initially. And right here, it's great to mention that whatever the result, I like to do something what I call better life stuff. So if you've not got the result you wanted, or even if you have got the result that you think was fair, it's good to look at the training process and the running and ask yourself, did my running and training improve my well-being? If it was yes, then I think it was worthwhile. Did I get to meet cool people? Did I go nice places? Did it give me a focus? Did it keep my motivation high? All these great positives that fed into your training and into that event, even if you didn't get the result, I would say it was a positive experience. So it's great to step out from that doom and gloom if you didn't get a result that you wanted, which I know is very, very difficult because you can train for so long for these things and you've got this opportunity right there in front of you and you don't feel like you've seized it. And you can feel very down about that naturally, but you have to start picking yourself up. Look at the result square on. I'm not saying get overly positive and ignore the result, but what I'm saying is look bigger picture. It's often been very valuable and positive within your well-being and life on that journey. And it is a journey, and we're not always going to get the results that we deserve or we work for, but that is why we love ultra running. That is why we come back to it all the time. No fun to win all the time. No fun to keep getting the result you want. That's not how life works. You sometimes need to be kicked down to come back. So this is the kind of the entanglement you get in with it. And obviously a lot of people who DNF will return to that very event to try and get that revenge as well. So the result
Can I interrupt with a poll for everyone at that point, Ronnie? Because I think that's actually a really good exercise for everyone to think about. And that's do you feel that your last race has enhanced your life or improved your well-being, like the whole training process? Because I think that's a really good question for people to ask themselves that we probably often don't. Like, we go through the process of how the race went, but we don't actually think about the day-to-day training that we did for it. And yeah, I'll give people a few more seconds, but unsurprisingly, you'll see that the vast majority of people will say yes, absolutely, it did. I'll end it now and share the results. Yeah, 93% said yeah, definitely, and only 7 no, not really. So even if you had that DNF, the process of getting to the start line has improved your life somewhat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it's all about. And that's running in general, not just ultra running, but you commit a real serious amount of time to ultra running. That's the nature of the beast. And that's why you're so involved with it. And that's why it hurts when you don't get your result. But that's why it's even more important to step back again. You've got so much emotional and physical and time investment in what you're doing as an ultra runner when you do it properly and you train, that it can only be a good thing for you. And if it's not enhancing your life, maybe drop down the distance, maybe take a break, but it should always be enhancing. Now, we're not going to go there in terms of relationships right now. That's a whole nother topic and debate. But again, if it's causing massive frictions with relationships and marriages and children and things, then that comes into that when the ultra runner might need to rethink things, because obviously it shouldn't just enhance your life, but those around you, is my belief. And so there's always going to be some negotiating, and it makes things hard, but looking beyond ourselves with that as well is important. It's got to have longevity. If you're wanting to ultra run for a very long time, it's got to work for you and your family. And if it doesn't, it won't have the legs in it, or it'll cause friction within your family. But anyway, the second thing is the practical. Now, the practical, so we've looked at the result. There's a few things under the practical. I'll whip through them. Logistics. There's always some logistics with ultra running. And I think it's really worthwhile to just make a real little note of how you got to the event. Did you travel the day before? Were you rushing to get to registration because your train was late? Do you wish you did go the day before? How did you get home? Did you have a crew? Did you have somebody to take you home, or did you have an absolutely horrendous train journey and bus ride to get home, and you said you never want to do that again? Logistics matter. If you arrive at the start having been flustered and looking like you're going to miss registration because you've travelled on the day for a later registration, or you've got accommodation where there's not taxis to the start line on the morning, then that's something you need to make a note of, not only for that event, but for future events, that to get the logistics in order, because there's no point training so hard for that to then scupper your plans on the day. The second thing related to that is accommodation. You know, what was your accommodation like? Was it close to the train station? Could you walk to the start venue from your accommodation? Was it above a nightclub? You know, little things like, you need to get your accommodation right. Most people for the bigger, I'm talking perhaps I think for a lot of the hundreds, people travel the day before, maybe stay somewhere, especially if it's a 6 a.m. start. But especially for the 150 mile, 200, you get more. You've got to go to the destination. Most people will travel a day or so before, so accommodation plays into that, and getting good rest before your event. And also as well, like I alluded to, if you DNF, you're probably going to want to come back. So if you've got these notes and things worked well, you've got your planning done for next time you want to go and do that event, which is always nice. The next thing is kit. Now, as we've put in the Harrier pack, ideally you'll make a kit list, a physical, real life, tangible kit list on paper or on your phone or whatever it is, but it'll be actually there. You won't just throw everything in your bag and in the boot of your car and drive to your start. If you've got that list, it pays very valuable now afterwards, because you've got something to compare. So even the clothes you was wearing, the trainers you wore, and then your kit bag, everything that you itemize that you would carry. Again, more important the further you go, I think, but definitely applicable to 100 milers. What I like to do on the kit is in brackets next to the items, put whether they worked, whether I used them, and things like if a t-shirt chafed, that's where that would go. If my socks were no good, that's where that would go. If my trainers let me down, that's where that would go. So right next to where I had my kit, I then evaluate my kit very quickly, and make changes for next event if need be. Same thing, very similar to the drop bag. You should have a drop bag list pre-made. You should have then packed your drop bag to the list. Again, not everyone's strong on lists and will just guess. If you do it retrospectively, that's still helpful. Unpick your drop bag and look at what was in it. What did you use? What did you not use? So I'll just put never used or very helpful. Your drop bag is something that you've got to learn to nail. Race directors are getting progressively more annoyed with the size of people's drop because they're anxiety packing. I'm not sure if I need that, so I'll take it. I'm not sure if I'll use that, so I'll take it. And you're trying to get it to a 32 litre pack, and then bring a hold all or a suitcase, and it's not acceptable. So you've got to nail down your drop bag really from your notes thereafter. What did you use? Now, of course, it's changeable to the terrain you were on, and
we've got Ronnie back now, or we had him back. Oh, he's back.
yeah.
Yay.
Well done, Mary.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can see Ronnie again. We had Ronnie, Kate and I were just trying to answer a question that I think is probably more suited to you about how important it is to set the right goal to evaluate the fairness of your result. That's from Michael.
Yeah, you need to set the right goal, or around about the right goal in the first place, of course. But I think there's also something to be said for being intuitive with just a feeling of, was it a fair result? So even if it's nowhere near the goal that you'd actually set for yourself and you fell way short of that, I don't feel that you would feel disappointed if you'd been honest with yourself and actually you got an honest result and you got a fair result. So it's the two playing together, because sometimes we undersell ourselves, definitely, but in ultras quite often by mistake we can often shoot too high and too far because you've not been to the terrain, you don't know the route, for example, and you're working on simple maths of miles per hour and then you fall way short of it. But I think if you ask yourself that honest question, was the result fair, then more often than not you'll get your answer from a feeling rather than from figures. But without a doubt, if you've got a thwarted ambition and goal from the offset, you could in effect go through your whole ultra running days being disappointed wrongly because you're actually doing really well for your ability, but you thought you should always do better. That, I think a coach helps with that, to help somebody have that honest talk and say your goal's too high. That's not negative. That's sometimes like where you're pulling that proof from that you can do that. And until you have, perhaps you don't jump that high and you just keep going with it and see what experience gives you. There's nothing worse than constantly feeling despondent because your goal was wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of tying into that about feeling despondent, Laura's asked that she attempted her first 100-miler in a heat wave in July. And she had her very first DNF. She said it's really hit my running mojo and allowed all the negative gremlins about not being a proper runner to creep in, despite having completed other ultras of up to 100K before. Some of the circumstances around the DNF were out of my control, and I found that really frustrating. How do I dust myself off and go again? I really want to finish the course.
Well, you forget about the course first off, I would say, and you get back to what you're doing today, and you get back into your training and focusing on what you're doing day to day. That'll come down the line, if you want to call it revenge or whatever you want to label that with, but that'll come later. But it'll only come from focusing in on what you're doing right now, and part of that has got to be start enjoying what you do again. So I'd almost rip the training plans up for at least a few weeks, and I'd just get out there and I'd pick the nice routes I want to go to. I'd walk if I want to, and just try and get the love back into my trail running. Obviously it's very, very difficult thing to do, running a heat wave and 100-miler, so the circumstances beyond her control there as well. But you'll get better at what you love doing, and getting in that process of it day to day and building and compounding that fitness. And nobody's got longevity from discipline alone, because if you're not liking what you're doing, you do stop doing it at some point. So for me, it'd be kick the event down the line, don't even really think about it, and think, how do I today start enjoying my running again, and do whatever you need to do to make that happen. But it will be stop beating yourself up, and it'll be take the pressure off. There'll be two major things that need to happen. You've not failed, you've just not succeeded on that on that occasion, and you've got a lot of things in your past that you have done well with. So we're all going to fail, but it's an opportunity to learn. And if we get too afraid to fail, then obviously we'll put a boundary around ourselves and stop really trying to do things that we think we would actually fail at, and kid ourselves. So yeah, nobody likes to fail, but that needs to incentivize us and inspire us to do something differently. But you got to enjoy it today.
Just realized I was on mute and I was saying, yeah, I get it. One more question and then I'll let you continue. From Glenn. He's never run a multi-day event before. What advice would you give him to get through those dark moments? He's managed to get through a night and a whole day running, but he felt so upside down. He'd love to run Offa's Dyke at some point, but he's keen to hear your tips on how you get through those really long hours where self-doubt starts creeping in.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I love all this stuff. I think I heard a saying recently about something along the lines of when it's hot, you go into the fire, and when it's cold, you think of ice. And basically what it's saying is, don't try and oppose the situation that you're in. If you think of the opposite when you're in an actual situation, if you think of cold when you're really hot, you'll feel hotter. And if you think of the heat when you're really cold, you'll feel colder. So you just go into it and you just let it flow. And in those dark moments, which do come, you just let them be, you just let them happen. I've talked about this before. I don't try and positively think my way out of negative thinking. I just sit with the negative thoughts. I just be with them. I just watch them. I make friends with them. I play with them. I smile with them. They have absolutely no power over me because I'm just there with them. But the minute I would try and push those away, i.e. think of the opposed scenario as in being positive and happy and feeling good, I feel worse. So you just take a bath in them, you're just there with them, and everything just will subside when you're comfortable being uncomfortable like that. Time will just pass and then the sun will rise and you'll start to feel better anyway. If you push it away, if you don't want it to be there, it'll get you more so. And this is the thing with the finish line as well. This is exactly the same scenario that happens when people want to finish a race and they get so obsessed with the finish, but you're nowhere near the finish. It's great to want to finish and have the incentive and the motivation to keep going forward. But if you alienate the finish to be too far away, then it feels unachievable. And that's actually what breaks you down and makes you want to stop. So there's a certain level of desire that you need, and then you just sit in that.
Cool. That sounds great. Thank you for that. I think we'll leave more questions until later on. So if you want to continue with where you left off when we got interrupted with internet.
Yeah, I just finished drop bag, so I was still on the practical, but I think I maybe got that over the net with the drop bag just to know what you're using and what you're not. And the next thing on the practical, and then we're off that, was just your crew, just a mention of did your crew work? Did the individuals you had work well, or was you quibbling? Did you give them enough information beforehand? Could you have helped them out more with locations and the rules and what have you? But just did your crew work? Did they benefit you? Because sometimes crews slow you down significantly because you stop a lot more because you see your crew a lot more and take a lot more breaks, and you might actually be better without a crew and just using a drop bag facility. So there's that to assess as well. On to the next biggie then, which is the strategy. And there's a few subsections within strategy. First one is sleep. Just kind of been talking about that really. On most 100-milers, you won't sleep unless it's on really arduous terrain, which makes the time length and the duration much longer, of course, and then sleep might become needed. But on most 100-milers with a 30-hour cutoff, most individuals won't sleep. They won't even nap. They will just continue through it all because it is just that one night. if it is in the mountains, if it is much further, and your cut-off's more like 48 hours, then it stands to reasons that some people might want a power nap or a sleep within that. But if you step up to the bigger distance, sleep becomes absolutely needed. You know, the cut-off for King offers was 90 hours. What's that? Nearly 4 days, I think. So you're not going to survive. So you're going to need to power nap at least, and that's what I did myself. After the event, I've recorded and gone back retrospectively and looked at where I slept and how long for. And I know that because I always slept for 30 minutes. And I knew the locations of that. So I can top that up and I can look at how that worked, because sleep really worries people on the bigger ultras. But so retrospectively, it's good to say, yeah, this is the plan I executed and it worked well, or it didn't. And how would I improve that? So sleep's the first thing you'd look at. Fueling, how well did you fuel? Did most people won't eat anywhere near as much as they intended to, so that's kind of okay. But I think what you need to be looking at, was there ever any long periods of time when you never took any fuel on whatsoever? So I would look more along the lines of, did I fuel throughout the event steadily rather than the quantity that you took? So if you aim to take 30 gels over an event, you might take 15. But as long as you took those 15 spread out over the event, that's a great start. The mistake is to have 8 to 12 hours where nothing goes in. I mean, you might want to make a note of whether you was ever nauseous and that led to you not wanting to eat and things like this again. But funnily enough and paradoxically, that can come from not fueling in the first place. Hydration and electrolytes would be your next thing. Did you drink enough, and did you manage your salts, either if that was from putting powder in your bottles or from salt tablets? But did you do that? And navigation would be the last thing on strategy. Did you use maps? Did you use GPX? Did you just follow the way markers? Did you have a guidebook? How did you navigate? And did you get lost a lot? And if you did get lost a lot, how could you improve that? Do you need to go on a navigation course? Do you need to know how to use GPS properly on a handheld or a watch? But how can you mitigate that problem of getting lost on your next ultra? So worth assessing that as well. The next big thing is race conditions. So obviously that's bespoke and specific to that very event, because you've kept your notes on what you've eaten and what you've drank. It's worthwhile making a note of what the weather was like, what the terrain was like, what underfoot conditions were like, what the checkpoint stop was like, and what the event was like as a whole. What was you able to eat at the checkpoints? Again, if you use that company again, that could be helpful. And for you to remember what you've actually liked picking off the aid stations, and what was the trail well marked or not, and how did you cope with that? The next big thing, and this obviously as a coach, this is something that I'm really interested in, is your actual conditioning. So during the event, how did you feel? Did you feel well prepared? Did you feel like you was physically able to match the terrain and match the distance in front of you, or did you feel undertrained? Did you become injured? Did you get issues of any nature, and why perhaps did they occur? Did your feet hold up? Did you get hot spots? Did you get blisters? Are there things you could do to perhaps mitigate that in the future, from either pre-taping or looking after hot spots and airing your feet more so? Did you cope with sleep deprivation? Did you hallucinate? What was that like? Could you find ways to cope with it better? Did your mindset hold up? You know, not just your body. Like how was your head? Did you get really negative? Did you get a really low mood? And this is not to judge it. This is just to acknowledge it. Does that come your way? You know, if you traverse a country for X amount of days, it's perfectly reasonable to, when you get tired, to expect low mood and to feel a bit depressed at times. If you feel like that's not reasonable, then that hurts a lot more. So to know it's coming your way is much better than to expect to feel really happy and positive all the time, which is not really the reality of ultra running. So these things of your experience on previous events can help you be ready for that. I heard a saying something about hell's a lot easier to handle when you know you're going there. And I think it's a little bit like that on the longer stuff sometimes. You know you're going to go through that. So being ready for it is really quite handy. And one of the final things is the result reasoning. So you've gone through all that process or not, as I alluded to at the start, but they're highlighted areas you might need to look at, which is applicable to your event. And you started with the result and you maybe wasn't sure why you DNF'd or whether it was a fair result. But now you've gone through everything, you ask yourself the question again and say, you know, am I happy with this result? Given everything I've just gone through, was it fair? Does it feel right? Could I have done anything else looking at it from retrospectively? So it's really good to revisit that result question again and see if you've gleaned any insight. For me as a coach, obviously, we don't always nail it. We don't always understand why something happened, like why somebody DNF'd or didn't feel good, or the opposite of why someone had such a great race, but because there's so many variables. But where we can, we're trying to capture that, because otherwise we haven't got a way to work on it to improve it. Do you have any questions?
Said that she'd like to understand more about post-race reflections. She said after her first 50K, she wanted to do a write-up, but nothing came to her. She did have a feeling of accomplishment, and also for the first time truly believed in myself for the first time in my life. That was a big for me. I think that's okay. I think that's sufficient, right? You've thought about it afterwards and you've reflected on it and you felt good.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I'm trying to get across. I've got to highlight all these areas because they're valid points, but I'm not saying that you sit down and go through all these and create this massive report. I don't do that with my runners. I've got these areas in my mind, and if they don't provide me with a bite-sized answer that I'm happy with, then I need to probe on those areas to make sure I get that answer. The way this is a process, and what we actually want is your outcome. If you can get your outcome from just going to a coffee shop and thinking about it, then that's all you need to do as an individual. But for most people, they'll need to put pen to paper and they'll need to think a bit deeper about that to catch things, or at least talk to somebody about it and then write it down. And so there's absolutely no right or wrong way to do it. And that's really important to catch. Introverts are going to be much better at a race reflection than an extrovert, as a, you know, real ballpark kind of statement, but that's generally going to be true. If you journal, if you keep notes, then you're going to be quite happy writing a race reflection for you. You don't have to share it as a blog. A blog, I think, something different in my opinion. I don't share my race reflections as a blog because I think it's really boring. From my subjective looking in on it, I think nobody wants to know what train I caught, but I might want to know because it's important to me. What I would write for people is hopefully something a little bit more interesting, but I could be wrong on that as well. But yeah, I think you have reflections for you, and then you have blogs for people, and they could be related. Runners give me sometimes that, like, I open a can of worms by asking, how did it go? And they just let me have it. And they give me this reflection, but all over the place. And it's very ugly, but that's okay, because that's how it will come. When I write my reflections, I go back in after and make order of it. It doesn't come out in order. It comes out in a big mess. You just want to be possessed, let a conscious stream of thoughts come out onto the paper, get it all down, and then sort your grammar and your spelling and your order later. That's where the magic will happen to catch everything. And that's why I don't give it like a par Q. Please answer this race reflection questionnaire, because it's so dull. So yeah, she's done the right thing there. It's just, you've got what you need from it. You feel that, you move on. You don't need to reflect any further. If you keep making the same mistakes, you better reflect at some point. If you're not learning, if you feel really lost, then you perhaps need to reflect.
Yeah, I think for me personally, writing things down helps them sink into my brain more. If I just have a fleeting thought, which I do all the time, you know, it doesn't it doesn't mean as much, but that's just me, and that's just how my brain works. So I think actually going through the process of physically writing something down would be really beneficial for me to not make it the same mistakes again and again and again. But I think, like what you were saying, you know, it's individual, and you need to find out what works well for you.
Yeah, there's the whole journaling thing is not there because it's not very valuable. You know, it's taken off for a reason. Journaling is very valuable to the individuals that like it and enjoy it and do it, because it's just constantly reflecting, whether that is setting goals for the month and then reflecting at the end of the month, what did you do, what did you achieve, what do you need to change, and it keeps you flexible instead of just having rigid goals and plans you keep charging towards, and they get old and they're tired and you're tired, and you really should change things up, but you're so stubborn you're not. So that's where continual reflection and journaling is so advised, and it works. But again, not everybody's going to do it, and it'd be horrible to try and make somebody journal or reflect if they didn't want to. It just will not work. The last thing for me to conclude on, really, and I think this is key from any reflection, is where do you go from here? Now, most people will have other events booked in for even after they've finished that big goal. Not always, but normally you've got things in the calendar and in the diary that is already booked in before you finished your big challenge. So you can reflect on whether that's good for you, whether that's right for you now. You know, did you enjoy the format of this big race? Is it something that inspires you? Is it something you want to keep doing? Or is it something it's too far for you? It plays havoc with your life and your well-being, and it's not something you want to continue doing. So to look at it like that, what do you like about the event? What did you dislike about the event? Have your aspirations changed? If you had something even bigger on the horizon and you really struggled with this event, has your aspirations changed? Do you feel like that's possible now? Or do you feel like you need to go back to the drawing board and work on yourself a bit more to be able to do it? There's no right or wrong with that. But if you finish a 50 miler and it feels really hard, that's okay. You could probably still do a 100 miler, because where the finish line is, it always feels difficult. But if you finish a 50 miler and you're riddled with lots of injuries, and you've got a 100 mile scenario, and you've got to look at that and think, yeah, that 100 miler needs to be next year, not this year. So look at whether your aspirations need to change. Have they been jolted or encouraged? Do you feel inspired? And do you need to sit down with this feeling that you've got now and plan a short-term or long-term plan ahead of, yes, I love that, and that's where I want to go with things, just to stop you getting caught up or forgetting that down the line and ending up booking on anything's willy-nilly instead of your real passion and desire of, you know, for me, I love the long game. I've just come off King Offers, so I'm like, what else is long out there? Like, where? And I'm like, I'm booked up next year on crazy events because I'm in that mode. It's not just excited, it's inspired, and it tells me I'm on the right path. And I think you need to step with that. If you delay on that, you can lose your direction again. And you keep it flexible. I could change my mind, but right now it feels good. And I think people should flow with that, because I think wherever you want to lean, you lean.
Yeah, that fits really nicely in with the one last question before I think we let everybody get on with their evenings. From Ian. Now, Ian's just run his first 50K on Saturday. Well done, Ian. That's brilliant. I want to progress in terms of distance and have a 40 miler self-supported in mind next. I know of another 40 miler. I wonder where that might be that he could try next year. He's asking how soon he should attempt the step up.
Yeah, it's the step up is I don't think it's too big. I think you could do it as soon as you was ready, as soon as you've got your plans and everything's mapped out for you. You don't really have to wait on that from a 50K to a 40 mile. You know, tomorrow seems a good day. You won't need much from that. these building blocks in ultra running, they get silly, and obviously when you step up further again and go to 200 mile, you don't necessarily do 150 or 170, but especially when it's closer, like 30 odd mile to 40 odd mile, you kind of go for it. You plan it out, you go for it, but you've got to bear in mind that self-supported gigs are far tougher than events, and I'm sure you'll find out the hard way on that. But if you can do it self-supported, and I'm a huge fan of self-supported styled adventures and do a fair few of them myself, you can do events far easier, and you feel like you're treated like a king. So I'm an advocate of it, but plan it thoroughly, make sure you're safe, and then just go for it. But you don't need a long span from now to build again. Just use the fitness you've got.
Brilliant. That's a really good tip. Thank you, Ronnie. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sorry about the technical hitches, but we have been recording. So I will edit this video together, and it will be up on YouTube in a couple of weeks. And thank you to Ronnie for joining us and sharing your pearls of wisdom. Again, just brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And yeah, stay tuned, because module 3 is going to be coming your way very, very soon. And you can get modules 1 and 2 on the website now. Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good evening.